they asked me to do it, and I was anxious to do some live appearances. It's been a long time since I've been on stage in front of anybody live. And I was anxious to do some live appearances.
What if everything you knew about Elvis Presley was a lie? What if the greatest story in rock and roll history was built on a deception so massive, so carefully orchestrated, that it fooled the entire world for over 40 years? 3 weeks ago, a call came in to a small law firm in Memphis, Tennessee. The voice on the other end was shaky, aged, but unmistakably familiar to anyone who's ever heard Elvis speak. The man claimed to be Jesse Garon Presley, Elvis's twin brother, who the world believes died at birth on January 8, 1935. But here's where this story gets absolutely insane. This man didn't just claim to be alive. He claimed to have spent his entire life living in the shadows of his famous brother, carrying secrets that could destroy everything we thought we knew about the king of rock and roll. The attorney who took that call, Rebecca Morrison, initially thought it was another Elvis impersonator looking for attention. But then the caller started revealing details about the Presley family that were never made public. Details about private conversations between Vernon and Gladys Presley. Details about financial arrangements that only family members would know. Details about scars on Elvis's body that weren't documented anywhere. Morrison became a believer when the man provided her with a safety deposit box number and key. Inside that box were documents, photographs, and personal items that seemed to prove the impossible, that Jesse Garon Presley had been living under an assumed name for decades. The man calling himself Jesse claimed he was dying of cancer and could no longer carry the burden of his family's greatest lie. He said he'd watched from the shadows as Elvis struggled with fame, addiction, and the weight of living for two people. He said he'd been there for some of Elvis's most private moments, including his final days at Graceland. But here's what makes this story absolutely explosive. Jesse claims he wasn't just a hidden twin. He alleges that he actively participated in Elvis's career, serving as a body double during certain performances and public appearances. He says there were times when the world thought they were watching Elvis Presley, but they were actually watching Jesse. The supposed evidence is staggering. Handwritten letters allegedly from Elvis to Jesse, discussing their arrangement. Photographs showing two men who look identical, but with subtle differences. Financial records suggesting payments to someone with Jesse's alleged assumed identity. Medical records that seem to document two different people with the same DNA. Jesse claims the deception started as a survival mechanism. The Presley family was desperately poor, and when one twin was born seemingly stillborn, the midwife suggested they could claim both babies died to avoid the expense and heartbreak. But Jesse wasn't actually dead. He was weak, barely breathing, but alive. According to his account, Gladys made a devastating decision. She would raise Elvis openly, but keep Jesse hidden, telling the world he had died. This way, if anything happened to Elvis, Jesse could step in. If Elvis became successful, Jesse could help carry the burden. It was insurance, born from poverty and desperation. The story Jesse tells is one of sacrifice and heartbreak. He describes growing up in secret, watching his brother become famous while he remained invisible. He talks about the emotional toll of being a ghost in his own family, of loving a brother who had to pretend he didn't exist in public. But Jesse also claims there were benefits to this arrangement. He says he was Elvis's closest confidant, the only person who truly understood the pressure Elvis faced. He alleges that Elvis relied on him not just emotionally, but practically, using Jesse as a stand-in when the demands of fame became too overwhelming. The timing of Jesse's alleged revelation is crucial. With Elvis's estate worth hundreds of millions of dollars and his legacy more valuable than ever, the emergence of a living twin brother would have massive legal and financial implications. It would mean Elvis's will, his estate planning, and his family's inheritance could all be called into question. Jesse claims he's not coming forward for money. He says he's dying and wants the truth to be known before he passes. He wants people to understand that Elvis's struggles weren't just about fame and fortune. They were about carrying the weight of 2 lives, 2 identities, and a family secret that nearly destroyed them both. The documents Jesse has allegedly provided include birth certificates, medical records, and even what appears to be a signed confession from Vernon Presley, admitting to the deception on his own deathbed. If these documents are authentic, they would rewrite everything we know about Elvis Presley and his family. But here's the most shocking part of Jesse's alleged confession. He claims Elvis didn't die in 1977. He says Elvis had become so overwhelmed by the pressure of living for 2 people that they staged his death, allowing Jesse to step into the spotlight while Elvis retreated into the anonymity Jesse had always lived in. This revelation would mean that for the past 46 years, the world has been mourning the wrong brother. It would mean that Elvis Presley lived out his final decades in secret, while Jesse took on the burden of being the deceased king of rock and roll. The question everyone's asking is simple, but earth-shattering. Could this possibly be true? The Presley family's darkest secret runs deeper than anyone imagined, and it all started with a desperate mother's impossible choice on a cold January night in 1935. According to Jesse's explosive allegations, Gladys Presley didn't just lose one twin that night. She made a calculated decision that would haunt her family for generations. When Jesse was born, appearing lifeless, the midwife initially declared him stillborn. But minutes later, as they prepared his tiny body, Jesse began showing faint signs of life. Here's where the story takes a devastating turn. Gladys, overwhelmed by poverty and already struggling to feed her family, faced an unthinkable decision. The midwife supposedly told her that Jesse was so weak, he likely wouldn't survive anyway. They could officially declare both babies deceased to spare the family the agony and expense of watching Jesse slowly die. Or they could take a massive gamble. Jesse claims Gladys chose the gamble. She would raise Elvis in the open while secretly nurturing Jesse back to health. If Jesse died, they'd already grieved him publicly. If he lived, they'd have something no family had ever had: a spare heir, a backup plan, a way to ensure their bloodline's survival. No matter what tragedy might strike, but this decision required an elaborate web of deception that would grow more complex with each passing year. Jesse alleges that Vernon was initially against the plan, calling it playing God with our boys' lives. However, financial desperation eventually won out. The family was so poor they couldn't afford proper medical care for Jesse anyway, so hiding him seemed like their only option. The supposed evidence Jesse has provided includes a handwritten letter from Gladys to Vernon, allegedly written when the twins were 5 years old. In this letter, Gladys reportedly wrote, "Vernon, I can't keep living this lie." Jesse asks why he can't go to school like Elvis. "I tell him he's special, that God has a different plan for him, but I see the hurt in his eyes. We're raising one son to shine and another to hide, and I fear what this will do to both their souls." Jesse claims he was raised primarily by extended family members who were sworn to secrecy. His great-aunt Susan allegedly played a crucial role in his upbringing, moving him between relatives' homes whenever anyone got too curious about the extra child. The family created an elaborate cover story. Jesse was a distant cousin who'd been orphaned, and they were helping out temporarily. The financial motivations behind this deception allegedly became clearer as Elvis's talent emerged. Jesse describes watching his brother perform at local venues and realizing that Elvis had something truly special. The family supposedly began viewing Jesse not just as Elvis's hidden twin, but as their insurance policy against losing their meal ticket. According to Jesse's account, Vernon began coaching both boys on the deception when they were still children. Elvis was taught to never mention having a living brother, while Jesse was trained to study Elvis's was their family business, and that breaking the secret would destroy them all. The emotional toll on both boys was supposedly devastating. Jesse claims Elvis often cried about feeling incomplete, sensing his twins' presence, but being forbidden from acknowledging it publicly. Meanwhile, Jesse struggled with feeling like a ghost in his own family, loved, but never able to truly exist. The deception required constant vigilance. School records had to be carefully managed. Medical appointments were scheduled separately. When neighbors asked about the extra child they occasionally saw, the family stuck to their cousin story. Jesse alleges that Gladys became so paranoid about discovery that she would sometimes keep him hidden in the house for weeks at a time. As Elvis's career began taking off, the stakes of maintaining this secret grew exponentially. Jesse claims that by the time Elvis signed with Sun Records, the family was in too deep to come clean. They'd built Elvis's entire public identity around being the surviving twin, the boy who carried his dead brother's memory. Revealing Jesse's existence would have shattered that narrative and potentially destroyed Elvis's career before it fully began. The most damning piece of alleged evidence Jesse has provided is a supposed recording of Vernon confessing the truth to a pastor in 1976, just 1 year before Elvis's death. In this recording, Vernon allegedly says, "We thought we were protecting our boys, but we ended up destroying them both. Elvis carries guilt for a brother he thinks is dead, and Jesse carries the burden of being dead while still alive. We created a hell for both our sons, and I don't know how to fix it." Jesse's allegations suggest that this family deception wasn't just about hiding one twin. It was about creating a mythology around Elvis that made him seem destined for greatness, the miraculous survivor who carried his brother's spirit. But the cost of maintaining this lie would prove far greater than the Presley family ever imagined. He was always there, hiding in plain sight, and the evidence Jesse has allegedly provided suggests that millions of Elvis fans may have been watching the wrong brother without ever knowing it. According to Jesse's bombshell claims, his role in Elvis's life went far beyond being a hidden twin. He alleges that starting in the early 1960s, he began serving as Elvis's secret body double during specific performances, public appearances, and even personal situations where Elvis couldn't or wouldn't appear himself. The supposed system they developed was ingenious in its simplicity. Jesse claims that when Elvis was struggling with exhaustion, illness, or personal crises, he would step in seamlessly. The brothers had spent decades studying each other's mannerisms, and Jesse had the advantage of growing up watching Elvis perform from the shadows. Jesse alleges the first time he officially substituted for Elvis was during a recording session in 1962. Elvis had supposedly suffered a severe panic attack before entering the studio, and Colonel Parker was threatening to cancel the session, which would have cost thousands of dollars. Jesse claims he walked into that studio as Elvis Presley and recorded 3 songs that eventually made it onto official Elvis albums. The psychological dynamics of this arrangement were incredibly complex. Jesse describes feeling simultaneously powerful and invisible, finally able to step into the spotlight that had always belonged to his brother, but only as a ghost wearing Elvis's identity. He says it was both thrilling and devastating to receive applause and adoration that was never really meant for him. But here's where Jesse's claims become truly explosive. He alleges that some of Elvis's most memorable performances weren't actually Elvis at all. He specifically claims responsibility for certain television appearances in the mid-1960s when Elvis was reportedly struggling with prescription drug dependency and couldn't perform at his peak level. Jesse describes the elaborate preparation required for these substitutions. He would spend days studying footage of Elvis's recent performances, practicing specific gestures and vocal inflections. The brothers would rehearse together, with Elvis coaching Jesse on how to handle interview questions or interact with specific people they might encounter. The alleged evidence supporting these claims includes what Jesse says are private rehearsal recordings of both brothers practicing the same songs. These recordings supposedly reveal subtle but distinct differences in their voices and performance styles, differences that Jesse claims trained ears can detect in official Elvis recordings from certain periods. Jesse also alleges that Elvis's famous shyness and reclusiveness in later years wasn't just about fame fatigue. It was partially strategic. The more Elvis withdrew from public view, the easier it became for Jesse to step in when necessary without people noticing subtle differences in behavior or appearance. The emotional toll of living this double life was enormous. Jesse describes the agony of watching Elvis receive credit for performances he had actually given, while simultaneously feeling guilty for stealing moments that belonged to his brother. He says there were times when he questioned which one of them was the real Elvis Presley. The most disturbing aspect of Jesse's allegations involves Elvis's final years. Jesse claims that as Elvis's health deteriorated, the frequency of substitutions increased dramatically. He alleges that during Elvis's final tour in 1977, he performed in Elvis's place for nearly half the concerts, covering for a brother who was too sick and drug-dependent to take the stage. Jesse describes Elvis's reaction to these arrangements as a mixture of gratitude and deep shame. Elvis supposedly thanked Jesse for keeping the dream alive, while simultaneously apologizing for forcing his brother to live in his shadow. Jesse claims Elvis once told him, "You're the better Elvis, Jesse. You're what I could have been if I hadn't gotten so lost." The conspiracy, Jesse alleges, goes beyond just the brothers themselves. He claims that certain members of Elvis's inner circle, including some musicians and security personnel, were aware of the substitutions but were paid handsomely to maintain their silence. Jesse suggests that these people weren't just protecting Elvis's career, they were protecting a multi-million-dollar industry built around his image. Jesse's most shocking claim about this period involves Elvis's famous Las Vegas residency. He alleges that during several extended runs at various casinos, he and Elvis would alternate performances, sometimes switching mid-run depending on Elvis's condition. Jesse claims that casino executives were aware of the arrangement but didn't care as long as audiences remained satisfied and revenue continued flowing. The psychological impact on both brothers was devastating. Jesse describes Elvis as increasingly paranoid about being found out, not just regarding his health issues, but about the deception they'd been living their entire lives. Meanwhile, Jesse struggled with his own identity, never knowing if his talents were genuinely his own or just reflections of his famous brother. Jesse alleges that by 1977, both brothers were emotionally exhausted by the constant deception. Elvis supposedly told Jesse that he felt like they were two halves of one broken person, and that he didn't know how much longer they could maintain the charade that had defined their entire lives. The question that emerges from these explosive allegations is terrifying in its implications. If Jesse really did serve as Elvis's body double, how much of Elvis Presley's legacy actually belongs to the brother the world never knew existed? The truth that could destroy everything we thought we knew about Elvis Presley isn't just about one man's hidden life. It's about the complete dismantling of the greatest myth in entertainment history. If Jesse's allegations are true, then Elvis Presley as we know him never really existed. Instead, what we've been celebrating for decades is a carefully constructed persona built by two brothers who were forced to live as one person. Every song, every performance, every moment that made Elvis legendary could potentially be the work of both twins, making it impossible to separate their individual contributions to music history. The legal implications are staggering. Elvis's estate, currently worth over $400 million, would face unprecedented challenges. If Jesse can prove his identity and his role in Elvis's career, he could potentially claim ownership of recordings, royalties, and intellectual property that generations have attributed solely to Elvis. Graceland itself could be subject to legal disputes that would tie up the estate for decades. But Jesse claims he's not seeking financial gain. In his alleged final interviews before his supposed death from cancer, he stated that he's revealing the truth because both brothers deserve recognition for their sacrifices. He says Elvis died carrying the guilt of living for two people, while Jesse lived carrying the burden of being dead while still alive. The most devastating aspect of Jesse's revelation involves Elvis's actual death in 1977. Jesse maintains his earlier claim that Elvis didn't die that day, that they staged Elvis's death to allow both brothers to finally escape the prison they'd created. This would mean the world has been mourning the wrong story for 46 years. Jesse's final message allegedly was simple. Elvis and I were never meant to be one person living two lives. We were meant to be two people sharing one extraordinary gift. The world deserves to know that the king of rock and roll was actually two kings who loved each other enough to sacrifice everything for their family's survival. If true, this revelation doesn't diminish Elvis's legacy. It doubles it, revealing that behind the greatest entertainer in history were two brothers whose love for each other created the most elaborate deception entertainment has ever known. The question that remains is whether the world is ready to accept that everything we believed about Elvis Presley was both completely true and completely false at the same time. What's your take on this mind-blowing revelation? Could Jesse really be alive? Drop your thoughts below, smash that like button, and subscribe for more explosive celebrity secrets.